The gallery opening was supposed to be my triumph, 15 years of work culminating in a solo exhibition at one of the most prestigious contemporary art spaces in Seattle. I had spent months preparing, selecting pieces that represented my evolution as an artist, writing statements that tried to articulate what couldn't be said in words alone. My husband Daniel had helped hang the final pieces the night before, his hands steady on the ladder while I directed placement from below, both of us exhausted but satisfied. The invitation list included collectors, critics, gallery owners from New York and Los Angeles, people whose opinion could transform my career from sustainable to genuinely successful. Daniel had kissed me that morning and told me he was proud, that he'd be there early to help with any last-minute preparations. I believed him because in 12 years of marriage, he had never given me reason not to. I left the house at noon to meet with the gallery director, my portfolio tucked under my arm, my mind already running through the evening's logistics. I was 3 blocks away when I realized I'd forgotten my phone, left it charging on the kitchen counter where I'd been reviewing the guest list over coffee. I turned back, annoyed with myself for the distraction but not particularly concerned. It was just a phone. I'd be gone in 5 minutes. Before I explain what I heard when I walked back into my own house, before I describe the specific words that ended my marriage and redefined my understanding of the person I'd spent over a decade loving, I want you to understand something about betrayal. The word itself is inadequate. It suggests a single moment, a discrete action that can be identified and processed. But real betrayal isn't an event. It's a realization that rewrites your entire history, that transforms every memory into evidence of something you missed, some truth you were too trusting or too stupid to see. If you've experienced that particular species of devastation, you'll recognize what comes next. If you haven't, pay attention, because this is what it looks like when the person you trust most becomes a stranger. My name is Helena Russo. I'm 43 years old, and until 6 months ago, I would have described myself as successfully married to a man who supported my artistic career even when it meant financial instability and long periods of intense focus that left little room for conventional domestic life. Daniel worked as a software engineer for a medical device company, a stable job that provided the financial foundation allowing me to pursue painting full-time once we'd saved enough for a down payment on the house. We had no children by mutual decision. I'd been honest from the beginning that I didn't want to split my attention between art and motherhood, and Daniel had said he understood, that he valued our partnership more than conventional family structures. We lived in a restored Craftsman in Ballard, a neighborhood of Seattle that had gentrified during our tenure there, turning from working-class maritime community into an enclave of young professionals and artists. The house was our shared project. I'd painted murals on the bedroom walls, Daniel had renovated the basement into a climate-controlled wine cellar, and we'd spent weekends at estate sales finding furniture that matched our aesthetic. I met Daniel when I was 31, still struggling to establish myself, working 3 part-time jobs to afford studio space in a converted warehouse south of downtown. He had come to a group show where I had 2 pieces, both large-scale abstracts exploring grief and memory through layered paint and collage. He'd stood in front of one for almost 20 minutes, and when I finally approached him, artists always notice when someone actually looks rather than glances, he'd asked intelligent questions about my process and materials. We went for coffee after the show closed, talked until the cafe staff started stacking chairs, and discovered a compatibility that felt effortless. He was calm where I was intense, methodical where I was intuitive, comfortable with routine where I needed flexibility. It seemed like perfect complementarity, the kind of relationship where differences strengthen rather than divide. We dated for 2 years before marrying in a small ceremony at a vineyard in Woodinville, both of us more interested in the commitment than the performance of a wedding. The marriage worked because Daniel gave me space to be obsessive about my work. He understood when I spent 16 hours in the studio and came home covered in paint, too exhausted to cook dinner or maintain conversation. He managed our finances, handled household repairs, dealt with insurance companies and tax preparation, all the administrative maintenance of adult life that I found suffocating. In exchange, I brought beauty and spontaneity into his structured world. I filled our home with color and texture, dragged him to gallery openings and experimental theater, introduced him to artists and musicians who expanded his cultural reference points. We had different friend groups but overlapping social lives, different work rhythms but compatible domestic habits. We rarely fought because we'd established clear boundaries and respected them. Or so I thought. Because what I didn't know What I had no way of knowing until I walked back into my house that afternoon, was that Daniel had spent the past 3 years planning my death with the methodical attention to detail he brought to every significant project in his life. I used my key to open the front door quietly because I didn't want to disturb Daniel if he was on a work call. He'd mentioned that morning he was working from home to finish a project deliverable before the gallery opening. The house was silent in the specific way that suggests someone is present but occupied, the quality of stillness that comes from focused attention rather than absence. I started toward the kitchen where I'd left my phone, moving through the living room where early afternoon light filtered through the craftsman windows Daniel had painstakingly restored. That's when I heard his voice, low but clear, coming from his study. "The insulin is ordered," he was saying. "I used the overseas pharmacy, like you suggested. It'll arrive in an unmarked package, and the credit card statement will just show a generic charge. There's no way to trace it." A pause. I stopped moving, my hand frozen on the dining room chair I'd been passing. "Tonight is perfect," Daniel continued. "Helena will be stressed, drinking champagne on an empty stomach because she never eats when she's anxious. The gallery will be crowded, lots of people offering congratulations, multiple glasses. When she gets the injection, everyone will assume it's just the excitement and alcohol. By the time anyone realizes it's a medical emergency, it'll be too late. Diabetic shock in someone with no history of diabetes. They'll test her blood sugar, see the catastrophic levels, and assume some undiagnosed condition. No one looks for homicide when the symptoms match a medical crisis." I couldn't breathe. The words made sense individually but refused to cohere into meaning my brain could accept. Insulin. Injection. Tonight. My gallery opening. Daniel's voice was steady, practical, discussing my murder the way he discussed software architecture or home renovation plans, as a problem with variables that could be managed through careful preparation. "The insurance policy is straightforward," he said. 500,000, paid out to me as beneficiary. The house is in both names but reverts to sole ownership when one party dies. Her paintings appreciate after an artist dies, that's just market reality. I've already been contacted by 2 collectors who want first access to her archive. Between the insurance, the property value, and the art sales, we're looking at close to 2 million within a year. Another pause. I heard him laugh, a sound I'd heard thousands of times across 12 years, now transformed into something alien and monstrous. "I know you've been patient, Claire. 3 years is a long time to wait. But after tonight, we can finally be together openly. No more hiding, no more separate vacations, no more pretending we're just friends when we're around other people." Claire. My studio assistant. The woman I'd hired 3 years ago to help with administrative tasks, grant applications, inventory management, social media updates. The woman I'd trusted with access to my workspace, my schedule, my creative process. The woman who'd stood in my studio last week helping me select pieces for this exact show, offering opinions on sequencing and wall text. I'd paid her. I'd mentored her. I'd written recommendation letters for her graduate school applications. And she'd been sleeping with my husband, planning my murder, waiting for me to die so she could step into my life. I stood in my own dining room unable to move, my body locked in a paralysis that had nothing to do with physical injury and everything to do with the complete collapse of reality as I understood it. The man on the phone wasn't my husband. He couldn't be. My husband was the person who brought me coffee in the studio at midnight, who rubbed my shoulders when they cramped from hours at the easel, who defended my work to his conventional parents who thought art was a hobby rather than a vocation. My husband loved me. Except he didn't. He'd spent 3 years planning to kill me, and the only thing I didn't know was why. "I need to go," Daniel said, his voice shifting to the tone he used when ending business calls. "Helena should be back soon. She forgot her phone this morning. After tonight, this is all over. 1 injection, a couple of hours, and then the rest of our lives." He hung up. I heard his chair scrape back, footsteps moving toward the study door. And something in me finally moved, some survival instinct overriding the shock that had frozen me. I backed up silently, moving through the dining room toward the front door, my eyes locked on the study entrance. If he came out and saw me, if he realized I'd heard, would he accelerate the timeline? Would tonight's plan become right now? I reached the front door and slipped out, closing it with the softest click I could manage. I walked to my car, didn't run, didn't rush, just moved with the deliberate casualness of someone who had simply retrieved what they'd forgotten and was now leaving again. I got in the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove 2 blocks before pulling over and vomiting into the gutter. For 10 minutes, I sat there trembling, my hands clenched on the steering wheel, my mind racing through fragments of memory trying to find the moment this had started, the first sign I'd missed. 3 years ago. That's when he'd said he and Claire had begun their affair. I tried to remember 3 years ago, what had been happening in our lives, in our marriage, that would have made him decide I was disposable. We'd been happy. Or I'd thought we were happy. We'd taken a trip to Italy that spring, spent 2 weeks in Tuscany and Florence looking at Renaissance art. We'd celebrated our 9th wedding anniversary at the same restaurant where he'd proposed. We'd hosted a dinner party for his colleagues and I'd watched him charm them with stories about my creative process, presenting himself as the supportive partner of an artist. All of it had been performance. 3 years of lying to my face while planning my death. 3 years of sleeping beside me while sleeping with Claire. 3 years of patience while waiting for the right moment to execute their plan. I called my lawyer from the car, a woman named Sandra Keem who specialized in family law and had handled the estate planning Daniel and I had done 5 years ago. Sandra, I need to see you immediately, I said when she answered. Not tomorrow, not later today. Right now. Something in my voice must have communicated urgency because she didn't ask questions. I have a client meeting in 20 minutes, she said. Come to my office. I'll push it back. I drove to her downtown office in a fugue state, operating on autopilot while my conscious mind tried and failed to process what I'd heard. Sandra took one look at my face and closed her office door. Helena, what happened? I told her. Everything. The forgotten phone, the overheard conversation, the insulin and the injection plan and the timeline. The insurance policy and the affair with Claire and the 3 years of methodical preparation. Sandra's face went from concerned to alarmed to coldly professional. She took notes in her precise handwriting, asked clarifying questions, and when I finished, she sat back in her chair. You need to call the police, she said. Right now. This is conspiracy to commit murder. They can arrest both of them based on your testimony, search his devices for evidence of the plan. I shook my head. My testimony isn't enough. It's my word against his, and he'll just say I misheard or misunderstood. He'll get rid of the insulin, delete the communications, and then they'll both know I'm aware. I'll be even more vulnerable than I am now. Sandra nodded slowly. Then what do you want to do? I thought about it. About Daniel's methodical nature, his attention to documentation, his need to have backup plans and redundant systems. He wouldn't plan something this significant without leaving a trail he could follow if needed, some record of what he'd done and why. I need to get into his computer, I said. His personal laptop, not the work one. He keeps files there, financial planning documents, investment research, personal correspondence. If there's evidence, it'll be there. And if you find evidence? Then I go to the police with something concrete. Something he can't explain away. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Helena, if you break into his computer, anything you find might not be admissible in court. Illegal search, violation of privacy, his attorney will have it thrown out. I don't care about admissibility, I said. I care about having proof so I know I'm not crazy. So I know this is real. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Be careful. If he realizes you know, if he even suspects, you're in immediate danger. Don't go back to that house alone. But I had to go back. The gallery opening was in 6 hours, and Daniel would expect me to be there, would expect me to proceed as if everything were normal. If I disappeared, if I failed to show up, he'd know something was wrong. So I drove home, parked in the driveway, and walked back into the house where my husband was planning to kill me. Daniel was in the kitchen making lunch, and when I walked in, he smiled. The same warm, genuine-looking smile he'd given me that morning when he'd kissed me goodbye. Hey, you're back early, he said. Everything okay at the gallery? Fine, I said, my voice somehow steady. Just some last-minute details to review with Margot. I forgot my phone. I grabbed it from the counter where it had been charging. How's your project going? Finished an hour ago, he said, pleased with himself. I'll be able to leave for the opening by 5, help you set up if you need it. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since I'd overheard the phone call, and tried to find some indication of what he was planning. But his face revealed nothing. He looked like Daniel. My husband. The man I'd shared a life with for 12 years. And that was perhaps the most horrifying thing of all. I spent the afternoon in my studio, ostensibly doing last-minute work on price lists and wall labels, actually trying not to fall apart. Around 4 o'clock, Claire showed up. She'd offered to help with setup, an offer I'd accepted gratefully because I'd thought she was a friend. She walked into the studio wearing jeans and a black t-shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and when she saw me, she smiled. Hey, Helena. Big night. You nervous? I looked at her and felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. This woman had been in my home. I'd fed her dinner. I'd given her career advice and moral support when she'd broken up with her previous boyfriend. I'd told her about my childhood, my struggles with my mother, the insecurities that haunted my creative process. I'd given her access to the most vulnerable parts of myself, and she'd used that access to help my husband plan my murder. A little nervous, I said. But ready. Good, she said. This is going to be amazing. Your career is about to transform completely. Everything you've worked for is finally paying off. The irony was so brutal I almost laughed. She thought I'd be dead within hours, that this night would mark the end of my life rather than the beginning of my career. She was standing in my studio, looking at my work, knowing that by midnight I would be in an ambulance or a morgue, and she could smile at me like a friend. We drove to the gallery separately, Claire in her beat-up Honda, me in my car with Daniel. He held my hand the entire drive, occasionally squeezing it in what should have been reassuring gestures. You've earned this, he said as we pulled into the parking area behind the gallery. 15 years of brutal work, and now you get to see it recognized. I'm so proud of you, Helena. I looked at our joined hands and wondered how he could say those words while planning to inject me with insulin in a few hours. How did he reconcile the contradiction? Or was there no contradiction in his mind? Was I just an obstacle to be removed, a problem that needed solving so he could move on to the next phase of his life? We went inside. The gallery owner, Margot Chun, was directing the catering staff in setting up the wine and hors d'oeuvre station. The walls were hung with my paintings, 15 years of work distilled into 23 pieces that represented my evolution as an artist. I'd worked in series, exploring themes across multiple canvases before moving to new territory, and seeing them all together like this should have been overwhelming in a good way. Instead, I looked at them and thought, Daniel wants these to be worth more. He wants me dead because dead artists sell better than living ones. The opening began at 6. People started arriving, collectors and critics and friends from the art community. Everyone told me the work was stunning, transformative, the best thing I'd ever done. I smiled and thanked them and kept track of where Daniel was at all times. He moved through the crowd with a glass of wine, playing the supportive husband, introducing himself to people he didn't know as Helena's partner, offering anecdotes about my creative process. At 7:30, he brought me a glass of champagne. You should celebrate, he said. This is your night. I took the glass but didn't drink from it. I told him I needed to pace myself, that I wanted to stay sharp for conversations with collectors. He nodded, understanding, and drifted away to talk to one of his colleagues who'd come to support me. I watched him go and thought about the insulin. Where was it? In his jacket pocket? In Claire's bag? When would he make the move? During the crowded peak of the evening when no one would notice, or later when things had thinned out and a sudden medical crisis would seem like overwork and stress? At 8 o'clock, I slipped out of the gallery and called Sandra from my car. I can't do this, I told her. I can't stand there knowing what he's planning. I need to leave. Then leave, she said immediately. Go somewhere public and safe. Call the police, tell them what you told me. Even if it's just your testimony, even if they can't arrest him tonight, at least it'll be on record. If something happens to you, They'll know where to look. I almost did it. I almost got in my car and drove to the police station and reported everything I'd heard. But then I thought about how it would sound, a wife accusing her husband of murder conspiracy based on a phone conversation she'd partially overheard. He'd deny everything. He'd say I misunderstood, that he'd been discussing a plot for a novel or a true crime podcast he'd been listening to. He'd present evidence of our happy marriage, of his support for my career, of his investment in my success. And without proof, without the insulin or documented communications or some concrete evidence of planning, it would just be my paranoia against his reasonableness. I went back inside. The gallery was even more crowded now, the noise level rising as wine flowed and conversations became more animated. Daniel found me near one of my larger pieces, a canvas I'd titled Dissolution, that explored the breakdown of identity through layered paint and aggressive mark-making. "There you are," he said. I was starting to worry. "Where did you go?" "Just needed some air," I said. "It's overwhelming." "I know," he said softly, and he reached out to touch my face with genuine seeming tenderness. "But you're doing great. People are responding to the work exactly the way they should, with awe and a little bit of fear." He was right. My work had always been intense, exploring difficult emotional territory through visual means. But standing there looking at Dissolution, while my husband planned to kill me, I saw it differently. The painting wasn't about abstract identity crisis. It was about the moment you realize nothing is what you thought it was, that the structure holding your world together has been compromised, that dissolution is already happening whether you acknowledge it or not. Daniel handed me another glass of champagne. "Here," he said. "The critic from the Times just arrived. Margot says he rarely comes to openings anymore, so this is significant. You should talk to him." I took the glass, and this time I pretended to sip from it. I needed Daniel to believe everything was proceeding according to plan. I needed him to feel confident enough to make his move so I could document it, prove it, use it to destroy him. At 9 o'clock, Claire approached me with a concern I now recognized as performance. "Helena, you look pale," she said. "Are you feeling okay? Maybe you should sit down for a minute." I looked at her, at the fake worry in her eyes, and understood this was part of the setup. Establishing witnesses who could later testify that I'd seemed unwell before the medical crisis. Building the narrative that would explain away my death. "I'm fine," I said. "Just need to eat something. I haven't had anything since breakfast." "Let me get you a plate," she said, and she headed toward the catering table. I watched her go and saw Daniel intercept her, the two of them speaking quietly near the wine station. Was the insulin in the food she was preparing for me? In a drink she would bring? I caught Sandra's eye. She'd come to the opening as a friend rather than an attorney, and nodded slightly toward the restroom. She followed me a moment later. "It's happening," I told her once we were alone. "They're setting it up right now, establishing that I looked unwell, offering me food and drink. One of them is going to dose me, probably within the next 30 minutes. Sandra pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police." "And telling them what?" "That my husband might poison me at my own gallery opening based on a conversation I overheard. They'll send a patrol officer who'll ask Daniel some questions, he'll deny everything, and then everyone at this event will know I accused my husband of attempted murder. My career will be destroyed by the scandal, whether he actually does anything or not." She looked at me with frustration and fear. "Then what do you want me to do?" "Watch you die." "I want you to watch me pretend to die," I said. The plan came together in that bathroom with terrifying clarity. I would accept food or drink from either Daniel or Claire. I would wait 15 or 20 minutes, then I would fake a medical crisis, trembling, disorientation, slurred speech, the symptoms of insulin shock. I would collapse in front of witnesses, making sure to create a scene significant enough that an ambulance would be called. Sandra would stay with me, would make sure I actually got to a hospital rather than having Daniel insist on taking me himself. And at the hospital, blood tests would show my actual insulin levels, normal, because I hadn't actually been injected. That discrepancy, combined with my testimony about what I'd overheard, would be enough to trigger a serious investigation. "This is insane," Sandra said. "If you fake a medical emergency, they'll run tests. They'll figure out there's nothing wrong with you. Exactly, I said. Which proves Daniel intended to inject me but didn't get the chance. It proves consciousness of guilt. And once the police are investigating, they'll search his computer, his phone, his communications with Claire. They'll find the evidence I couldn't access on my own. Sandra stared at me for a long moment. You're betting your life on the assumption that he hasn't already dosed you, that he's waiting for the right moment rather than having done it already. I thought about the champagne I'd accepted but not drunk, the food I'd avoided eating. He's methodical. He'll wait until I'm in distress, until there are witnesses who can testify I was struggling. The injection will seem like a helpful intervention, husband administering emergency medication to his diabetic wife, except I'm not diabetic and the medication will kill me. I went back out to the gallery. Claire was waiting with a small plate of cheese and crackers, looking concerned. Here, eat something, she said. You really don't look well. I took the plate and thanked her, and I made a show of eating one cracker while she watched. Then I excused myself to talk to a collector who'd expressed interest in one of my larger pieces. For the next 20 minutes, I moved through the gallery holding the plate, occasionally pretending to eat from it while actually disposing of food in napkins or setting down pieces when no one was looking. At 9:30, I found a quiet corner near the back of the gallery and let my body start to shake. It wasn't hard. I'd been suppressing tremors all evening, operating on pure adrenaline and fear. Now I just stopped suppressing them. Let the shaking become visible. Let my breathing become rapid and shallow. Let my face show the distress I'd been hiding for 6 hours. Sandra saw me first. She moved quickly to my side, her hand on my elbow. Helena, what's wrong? Her voice was loud enough to attract attention, which was the point. Several people turned to look. I don't feel right, I said, making my words slur slightly. Everything's spinning. Daniel materialized from somewhere in the crowd, his face the perfect mask of concerned husband. Helena, honey, sit down. He tried to guide me to a chair, but I pulled away, staggering slightly. No, I need air. I took several unsteady steps toward the gallery entrance, then let my legs fold. Sandra caught me before I hit the floor, lowering me carefully while shouting for someone to call 911. The gallery erupted in concerned chaos, people crowding around, Margot Chen pushing through to see what was happening, Daniel on his knees beside me trying to take my pulse. I let my eyes roll back slightly, let my body go limp while keeping enough tension to appear conscious but severely impaired. She's going into shock, someone said, a doctor who'd come to the opening, exactly the kind of witness that would be valuable later. Someone check her blood sugar. Daniel's hand went to his jacket pocket. I saw him hesitate, saw him calculate whether this was the moment, whether he could inject me in front of all these people and have it read as emergency intervention. Then he saw Sandra watching him, saw the intense focus with which she was monitoring his every movement, and his hand came out empty. Does she have diabetes? The doctor asked. I don't. I didn't know if she did, Daniel said, his voice uncertain. She's never mentioned it. Someone call an ambulance, the doctor ordered. And get me an AED just in case. The paramedics arrived 8 minutes later. By then, I'd committed fully to the performance. Rapid breathing, cold sweat, trembling limbs, inability to focus on faces or respond to questions appropriately. They loaded me onto a gurney and into the ambulance. Sandra climbed in with me, and Daniel tried to follow. I'm her husband, he said to the paramedic blocking the door. I need to be with her. You can meet us at the hospital, the paramedic said. We don't have room for more than one additional person, and her friend was already inside. Daniel's face tightened, but he stepped back. As the ambulance doors closed, I saw him pull out his phone, already calling someone. Claire, probably. Telling her the plan had failed. At the hospital, I was admitted through the ER and taken immediately for assessment. The attending physician, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, ran through standard protocols, blood pressure, heart rate, neurological checks. They drew blood for testing. And as soon as we had privacy, I sat up and told her I needed to speak to hospital security and the police immediately. The doctor stared at me. Ms. Rousseau, You presented with symptoms of severe medical distress. I was faking, I said bluntly. My husband is planning to murder me tonight by injecting me with insulin to simulate diabetic shock. I overheard him discussing it with his mistress this afternoon. I faked the collapse to create a documented medical event that would show I hadn't actually been injected yet, which would prove his intent when police investigate. I need protection, and I need someone to contact the Seattle PD before my husband arrives and tries to get access to me. The doctor's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. She left the room and returned 3 minutes later with a hospital security officer and a uniformed police officer who'd been in the ER for an unrelated case. I told them everything. The forgotten phone, the overheard conversation, the insulin ordered from an overseas pharmacy, the insurance policy, and the affair with Claire. I gave them Daniel's name, Claire's name, our address, and our phone numbers. The officer took notes, asked clarifying questions, and called for detectives to come to the hospital. Your husband is in the waiting room, the security officer said. He's demanding to see you. What do you want us to do? Don't let him near me, I said. If he gets access, if he thinks he still has a chance to complete the plan, he'll try. Tell him I'm in serious condition and no visitors are allowed. The blood work came back while we were waiting for detectives. The ER doctor showed me the results with something like vindication on her face. Your insulin levels are completely normal, she said. Blood sugar normal. No signs of diabetic crisis or any other metabolic disorder. Whatever you thought was happening, your instincts were right. You weren't injected. 2 detectives arrived at midnight. I told them everything again, in more detail this time, answering their questions about the timeline and the specific language Daniel had used on the phone. They left to interview Daniel, who was still in the waiting room, and returned 40 minutes later with an update. He admits he was on the phone this afternoon, Detective Morrison, the lead investigator said. But he claims he was talking to a friend about a plot for a novel he's been working on. He says you've been under significant stress preparing for the gallery opening, and he's concerned you've had some kind of mental health crisis. He's demanding to see you and expressing concern that we're taking your allegations seriously. I felt cold fury settle over me. Of course he was denying it. Of course he had a prepared explanation. He'd had 3 years to plan this, which meant he'd had 3 years to plan contingencies for every possible disruption. His computer, I said. And his phone. There will be communications with Claire, possibly medical research about insulin overdoses, maybe financial planning documents about what he'd do with the life insurance money. He's methodical, he wouldn't plan something like this without documenting his research. Detective Morrison nodded. We're obtaining a search warrant now. Your testimony about what you overheard gives us probable cause, especially combined with the faked medical emergency and your husband's access to insulin. But I need you to understand, if we search his devices and don't find evidence of planning, if it turns out he really was discussing a fictional plot, you could face consequences for filing a false report. Search his laptop, I said. The password is Thornbird C47, it's his mother's maiden name and birth year. He keeps a folder called Personal Projects in his documents. If there's evidence, it'll be there. The detective left again. I was moved from the ER to a secure room in the hospital's psychiatric ward, not because they thought I was mentally ill, but because it was the only area with controlled access that would prevent Daniel from reaching me if he tried. Sandra stayed with me the entire night, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair by the window while I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if the detectives would find anything or if Daniel had been smart enough to hide his tracks completely. At 6 a.m, Detective Morrison returned. His expression told me everything before he said a word. We found it, he said. Everything. 3 years of communications with Claire Novak detailing the affair and discussing various methods for causing your death while avoiding suspicion. Medical research documents about insulin overdoses and how they present. Financial planning spreadsheets calculating the value of your art collection before and after your death, with price appreciation estimates based on deceased artist market trends. Order confirmations for pharmaceutical-grade insulin from an overseas supplier. And perhaps most damning, a detailed timeline for tonight's event with notes about optimal timing and witness management. I closed my eyes and felt something that wasn't quite relief, wasn't quite vindication. Just exhaustion. He documented everything, Detective Morrison continued. My guess is he needed the records to ensure he didn't forget critical steps. He thought his computer was secure, that you'd never have access or reason to check. He didn't account for the possibility that you'd overhear him, that you'd be smart enough to fake the medical crisis and force our involvement before he could execute. What happens now? I asked. We arrested your husband at 5:15 this morning. Claire Novak was arrested at her apartment at the same time. They're both being charged with conspiracy to commit murder, and depending on how the DA wants to proceed, possibly attempted murder given that your husband had the insulin in his possession at the gallery. They'll be arraigned later today. You'll need to make a formal statement, and you'll eventually have to testify if this goes to trial, though my guess is they'll both take plea deals once they realize how much evidence we have. He paused. Ms. Russo, you saved your own life. If you hadn't forgotten your phone, if you hadn't gone back at exactly the right moment to overhear that conversation, you'd be dead right now. And it would have looked exactly like a tragic medical event at your moment of professional triumph. I was released from the hospital that afternoon. Sandra drove me back to her apartment. There was no question of me returning to the house I'd shared with Daniel, and I slept for 16 hours straight, the kind of profound unconsciousness that comes after sustained trauma. When I woke up, it was Saturday evening. My gallery opening had been 30 hours ago. I checked my phone for the first time since the ambulance ride and found it flooded with messages. From Margot Chun, asking if I was okay and saying that despite the dramatic interruption, 3 pieces had sold by the end of the evening. From other artists in my community, expressing concern and support. From my mother in Portland, frantic because she'd heard about the medical emergency through the art world grapevine. And from my attorney Sandra, with a link to a news article. Local software engineer arrested for murder conspiracy, the headline read. The article detailed Daniel's arrest, mentioned me only as his estranged wife, a local artist, and included comments from Detective Morrison about the sophisticated nature of the plot and the defendant's apparent shock at being caught. The legal proceedings took 7 months. Daniel's attorney tried to argue that the documents on his computer were fiction research, that the insulin was for a friend's diabetic cat, that the affair with Claire was unrelated to any murder plot. But the documentation was too extensive, too specific, too clearly focused on me rather than any fictional character. The communications with Claire explicitly referenced our life insurance, our house, the timing of the gallery opening. There was no way to explain it away. In the end, both Daniel and Claire accepted plea deals to avoid trial. Daniel pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and was sentenced to 18 years in state prison. Claire pleaded guilty to conspiracy and received 12 years. As part of the plea agreement, they both had to allocate, to formally explain their actions and motives in open court. I attended that hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom while my husband of 12 years explained why he decided I should die. I felt trapped, Daniel said, reading from a prepared statement. Helena's career wasn't progressing as quickly as we'd hoped, and I was supporting us financially while she spent years on work that might never sell. I met Claire and realized I wanted a different life, but divorcing Helena would mean losing the house and supporting her indefinitely through alimony. When her gallery show got accepted, when we learned it would be a major event with significant press coverage, I saw an opportunity. If she died at her moment of triumph, the art would become more valuable, the insurance would pay out, and I could start over with Claire without the financial burden of divorce. He didn't look at me while he read. Not once. Claire's allocation was shorter. I loved Daniel, she said. I knew he was married, but he told me the marriage was over emotionally, that Helena was cold and self-absorbed, that he was staying out of financial obligation rather than genuine feeling. When he proposed the plan, I didn't think of it as murder. I thought of it as liberation for both of us. I didn't consider Helena as a real person with her own life and value. She was just an obstacle. After the allocutions, the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. I stood and walked to the front of the courtroom. I looked at Daniel for the first time since his arrest, and I saw a stranger. I loved you, I said. For 12 years, I trusted you completely. I shared my life with you, my work, my vulnerabilities, my dreams. I believed you when you said you were proud of me, that you supported my career, that we were partners. And the entire time, you were calculating my worth in financial terms. You looked at my paintings and saw investment opportunities that would appreciate after my death. You looked at our life insurance and saw profit. You looked at me and saw an obstacle. I turned to Claire. I mentored you. I gave you opportunities and connections. I trusted you in my most sacred space, my studio, where I create the work that defines my life. And you used that access to help plan my murder. I looked back at Daniel. You didn't just plan to kill me. You planned to let me die believing I'd finally achieved professional recognition, believing that my years of struggle had paid off. You wanted my last hours to be filled with joy so the shock would be more severe, the symptoms more plausible. That's a level of cruelty I still can't fully comprehend. The divorce was finalized 3 months after Daniel's sentencing. I got the house, full ownership of all my artwork, and the entirety of our shared assets. I also filed a civil suit against both Daniel and Claire, seeking damages for emotional distress and the destruction of my career momentum. The gallery show had been overshadowed by the attempted murder story, making it impossible to separate my artistic achievement from the scandal. The civil suit was settled out of court, with Claire's family agreeing to pay a 6-figure sum to avoid trial publicity. That money, combined with the house sale and the increased value of my paintings due to the notoriety, meant I was financially secure for the first time in my career. But financial security felt hollow when I'd acquired it by nearly dying at the hands of someone I'd loved. I moved to New York. I couldn't stay in Seattle, couldn't keep living in the city where Daniel and I had built our life together. I found a studio in Brooklyn, started working on a new series exploring betrayal and survival. The work was brutal, both to create and to look at, and it sold immediately. Collectors wanted pieces from the artist who discovered her husband's murder plot and had the presence of mind to fake a medical crisis to gather evidence. The attempted murder became part of my artistic narrative, whether I wanted it to or not. 2 years have passed since that gallery opening. I'm 45 now, living alone in Brooklyn, working constantly because that's the only thing that makes sense anymore. I had a show last year at a major gallery in Chelsea, and the reviews described my work as unflinching examinations of domestic violence and the betrayals that hide behind ordinary life. Everything I paint now is about trust and its destruction, about the moment you realize the person you loved most was your greatest threat. Critics call it powerful. I call it survival. I don't date. I don't maintain close friendships. I have professional relationships and cordial interactions with other artists, but I don't let anyone into my private life. Because the person who tried to kill me was the person I trusted most, and if I was that wrong about Daniel, how can I trust my judgment about anyone else? My therapist, whom I see twice a week, says I'm experiencing hypervigilance and trust impairment as symptoms of betrayal trauma. She says I need to work toward allowing connection again, that isolation is its own form of death. Maybe she's right. But isolation means safety. It means no one is close enough to hurt me. It means I control my environment and my vulnerability. I saw Daniel's mother 6 months ago at an art fair in Portland. She approached me hesitantly, looking older and frilier than I remembered. "Helena," she said, "I know I have no right to speak to you. But I wanted you to know that what my son did, I had no idea. He never told me about any of it. I would never have allowed." She trailed off, and I saw genuine grief in her face. She'd lost her son to prison, lost the future she'd imagined for him. "I know," I said, because I did know. Daniel had compartmentalized everything, keeping his conspiracy with Claire completely separate from his family relationships. "I don't blame you." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Your work," she said. "I saw the show in New York. I read the reviews. What he tried to do to you, somehow you turned it into something meaningful. Something that helps other people understand what betrayal looks like." "It's all I know how to do," I said. "When something destroys you, you either let it win or you make something from the wreckage. I chose to make something." We spoke for a few more minutes, and then she left. I watched her walk away and felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years, not forgiveness exactly, but a loosening of the rage that had been my constant companion. Maybe healing wasn't about trusting again or allowing connection. Maybe it was just about continuing to wake up every day and choose creation over destruction, work over despair, forward movement over paralysis. I still think about that afternoon when I forgot my phone and went back to the house. About the split-second timing that saved my life. If I'd remembered my phone initially, I never would have overheard Daniel's call. If I'd walked in 30 seconds earlier or later, I might have missed the crucial details. If I hadn't had the presence of mind to stay quiet and slip away, he might have realized I knew and accelerated his timeline. The whole trajectory of the past 2 years hinged on that moment, on that single decision to trust my instincts and act strategically rather than emotionally. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd gone to the gallery opening without knowing, if I'd accepted that injection from Daniel believing he was helping me, if I'd died there surrounded by my paintings and people celebrating my work. Would it have looked like he'd planned, a tragic medical event, a promising career cut short, a devoted husband devastated by sudden loss? Would he and Claire be living in my house now, sleeping in my bed, selling my paintings and spending the insurance money? The thought makes me physically ill, but I force myself to sit with it. Because the alternative, the reality I'm living, is only marginally better. I survived, but I'm not whole. I have success, but it's built on notoriety rather than pure artistic achievement. I'm alive, but I'm isolated in ways that might prove more destructive than a quick death would have been. My most recent series is titled The House of Ordinary Horrors, and it consists of 12 large-scale paintings depicting domestic spaces where violence is hidden just beneath the surface. Each piece shows a room that looks normal at first glance, a kitchen, a bedroom, a living room, but upon closer inspection reveals signs of threat. In one painting, the kitchen includes a cutting board where vegetables are being chopped, but the knife casts a shadow that looks like a weapon. In another, the bedroom shows rumpled sheets that could be from sleep or could be from struggle. Critics have praised the work for its psychological complexity, for the way it captures how betrayal hides in plain sight within the structures we think are safe. What they don't know is that every room I painted is a room from the house I shared with Daniel. The kitchen where he made me breakfast the morning he planned to kill me. The bedroom where we slept side by side while he was sleeping with Claire. The living room where I stood frozen listening to him discuss my funeral. I'm painting the geography of my attempted murder, and collectors are buying these pieces for tens of thousands of dollars to hang in their own homes. The irony isn't lost on me. I got a letter from Daniel 3 months ago. He's allowed limited correspondence from prison, and apparently I'm on his approved contact list because we're not divorced. We are divorced, but there was some bureaucratic error in updating his prison records. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten in his precise engineering script. He apologized. He explained that he'd been dealing with depression and financial anxiety, that meeting Claire had felt like an escape from responsibilities he found suffocating, that the murder plot had started as a fantasy he never intended to execute but then gained its own momentum. He said he understood if I never forgave him, but he wanted me to know he was deeply sorry and would spend the rest of his life trying to understand how he'd become capable of such evil. I read the letter once and burned it. Not out of rage, but out of a clear understanding that nothing he could say would matter. His apology didn't undo the fact that he'd spent 3 years planning my death with the woman I'd trusted as my studio assistant. His remorse didn't erase the moment I'd stood in my foyer listening to him discuss my funeral with enthusiasm. His regret didn't restore my ability to trust or love or believe that domestic life can be anything other than a carefully maintained performance hiding violent intentions. The question I get asked most often in interviews, and I give interviews now, part of the promotional machinery of the art world, is whether I'm grateful for the experience because it transformed my work and my career. And the honest answer is no. I'm not grateful. I wish I were still married to the person I thought Daniel was, still collaboratively building a life I believed was genuine. I wish my career had developed through the natural trajectory of hard work and artistic evolution, rather than through the notoriety of surviving attempted murder. I wish I could still look at a gallery opening as a celebration, rather than as the anniversary of the night someone tried to kill me. But wishes are irrelevant. This is the reality I inhabit now, a successful artist, a survivor, a woman who understands viscerally that the people closest to you are capable of unimaginable betrayal. That knowledge has made me a better artist and a worse human being. My work has depth it never had before because I understand how thin the membrane is between ordinary life and extraordinary violence. But I've lost the capacity for the kind of openness and vulnerability that makes art meaningful in the first place. I'm painting from a place of permanent damage, and while that damage is commercially valuable, it's personally devastating. There's no redemption in this story. No moment where I learned to trust again or found love with someone honest or discovered that the world is fundamentally good despite what happened to me. I'm 45 years old, successful in my field, financially secure, and profoundly alone. My paintings sell. My critical reputation grows. And every night, I go home to an empty apartment and wonder if the isolation I've chosen is actually freedom or just another form of the death Daniel tried to give me, slower, more subtle, but equally effective at erasing the person I used to be. The woman I was before I forgot my phone and went back to the house is gone as completely as if Daniel had succeeded with his injection. She's been replaced by someone harder, sharper, more successful, and infinitely more damaged. And there's no reversing that transformation. There's no going back to the person who believed that love was safe and partners were honest and domestic life was a refuge rather than a threat. So I paint. I wake up every morning and go to my studio and I paint the truth about what it means to survive the person who is supposed to love you. And if that's all I contribute, if my only legacy is making visible the hidden violence of ordinary betrayal, then maybe that's enough. Maybe survival doesn't have to include happiness or trust or connection. Maybe it's enough to simply refuse to let the person who tried to destroy you succeed.